Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game pod from the Timberwolves dominant win over the Toronto Raptors by a near historic margin on Wednesday night. We'll break down what went right for the majority of this game for the Wolves, what was most impressive about it. We also saw a lot of garbage time from some guys that don't get to play a ton. So lots to get to here today. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. It's a victory Thursday after the Wolves destroyed the Toronto Raptors on Tuesday night, a woefully shorthanded Raptors team that only dressed 8 players. And this thing was it was a 48-point win. I don't know. Like that's the open, right? Like it's a 48-point win. Lots to get to. I mean, it took, believe it or not, this is a 4-point game at the end of the first quarter. So we'll talk about how the Wolves completely blew this open. What was most impressive, some impressive individual performances, and what we could take away from this one. We'll talk a little about the garbage time. That was a little bit of fun to see, some of those guys play that don't get to play a ton. And we'll peek at the Western Conference standings where the Wolves are atop the Western Conference once again after sitting at third just a couple of days ago. So still a lot to get to today, despite the final score of this one. There was a lot of fun moments, really. So we'll get to all that here next. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Also, a reminder about the postcast. Not only do we cover your team every day right here on the Locked On Wolves audio feed and on YouTube, but we also give you instant episodes after every single game. Check out the Locked On Wolves postcast. You can find it right here on the audio feed for Locked On Wolves. You can also stream on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel immediately following each Wolves game. Get rapid reaction to all the biggest moments of the Locked On Wolves postcast, hosted by Luke Inman, and oftentimes alongside Jack Borman, editor-in-chief of Canis Hoopus, occasionally Tyler Metcalf from Canis Hoopus. So a fun show for sure. The episode before this one that you're listening to now if you're listening on any audio platform, the one before this is last night's postcast following Wolves Raptors. So be sure to go check that out. All right. So the Raptors came into this game. They had Gary Trent Jr., late scratch, of course, a Minnesota native. He was a late scratch due to back spasms. There were a few guys already out that, everybody knew was out, names that are rotation players on playoff teams, right? Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, RJ Barrett. And of course, when the Wolves lost to Toronto in the very first game of the season back in mid-October, a 3-point loss, neither team reached 100 points. That was a very different team, right? OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Dennis Schroeder, right? Completely different Raptors team. Now, this version of the Raptors started somebody in their NBA debut, and he signed a 10-day contract the same day on Wednesday in Malik Williams. And unfortunately, he didn't score at all in the game. He was the only player that played for Toronto in the game that did not score. Emmanuel Quickley is a rotation caliber player at this point. I wouldn't say Garrett Temple is. Jalen McDaniels is more of a deep bench type guy. Jordan Nwora has been a rotation player on a good team. But then you got some guy, Grady Dick, obviously, as a young player, has some potential. But, there were what, 3-ish NBA rotation players out of only 8 that were available to play in this game. So the Wolves had a massive advantage to start, and yet still only led by 4 at the end of the first quarter. It was, the third or fourth straight game? Minnesota's had a really sluggish start to the game. They scored just 23 points in the first quarter, struggled with some early turnovers, and especially transition defense. And that carried into the second quarter. Minnesota struggled to get back defensively. They only turned it over 9 times, the Wolves did, for the game, which is great. But I mean, obviously Toronto was going to run, right? They were going to run after defensive rebounds. They were going to run on turnovers. And that was an issue early in the game for Minnesota. But defensively, never an issue. They didn't give up more than 25 points in any quarter. They gave up just 19 in the first quarter, and they were dominant in the paint. The Wolves blocked 9 shots in this game, and it felt like they blocked 19 shots. They out-rebounded Toronto only by 2 for the game, but they won paint points fairly easily as well. I'm going to pull those up real quick. Maybe not by as much as I would have expected, and part of that was just the lackadaisical nature of this game overall. There was just a lot of jumpers in general. Minnesota won points to the paint by 6. They won points to the paint by 6. They won rebounding by 2, and blocked 9 shots in the game. So Rudy controlled the paint throughout. Jaden McDaniels helped control the paint. Jaden actually led the Wolves with 3 blocks in this game. And well, the Wolves offense took a minute. And by a minute, I mean like a quarter and a half to really get going. I think Chris Finch called a timeout mid-second quarter. I believe it was 35-31. It had been a 10-point game. Toronto had a quick push to make it like a 2-possession game, and Finch was like, all right, no. And called a timeout. Then by halftime, Minnesota had grown that lead back up to 16 points very quickly in the second part of the second quarter. So it was 16 at halftime. And then in the third quarter is when the Wolves really put the hammer down and closed the game out with just a flurry of scoring every which way. A lot of transition points for Minnesota. I mean, Toronto just completely stopped running the floor. Minnesota actually only ended up winning fast break points by 4, but they dominated in the turnover category. I already mentioned the Wolves only had 9 turnovers. Toronto turned it over 21 times in this game, and the Wolves scored 28 points off of those 21 Toronto turnovers. So that was maybe the biggest thing. The other thing is the Wolves crushed it outside the arc. They've had a couple games here recently where they were struggling, right? We go back to that Warriors game a week and a half ago, and they were over 50% from 3, and we saw that kind of come back to earth. There was the loss the other night to Sunday to Chicago, where the Wolves just missed a lot of open threes. And my takeaway was like there were a couple things that weren't great. Transition defense for one. But it was kind of like, hey, if they make, a realistic number of these threes instead of going completely cold and shooting sub 29%, I think, on Sunday against the Bulls from 3-point range. If they had just shot somewhere near their season average from 3, they'd probably win that game, right? This was, again, kind of the opposite. Now, Toronto wasn't exactly playing hard for stretches in this game. Defensively, they weren't really contesting shots after, I think, Naz Reid, somewhere in the middle of the game, broke their spirits with a couple of threes, and then the onslaught was, Ant broke his 0 for 22 streak from outside the arc, and the snowball was rolling down the hill at that point for the Wolves offense and also for Toronto's defense, but in a negative way. Minnesota wasn't really challenged on the perimeter and could get off whatever shots they wanted. It just took a quarter and a half for them to like really grease the wheels and be like, okay, we're going to try defensively. We're going to get back on defense in transition, and we're going to actually pass the basketball on offense, generate open shots, and, go from there. I want to get into some individual performances. I want to talk about what I liked about the Wolves' performance overall. Obviously, a lot to like when you win by 48 points. But I want to talk about some individual players here. We will do individual studs and duds, but I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about the landscape of the Western Conference. So we'll do all of that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Amazon Fire TV. I've got a couple of Amazon Fire TVs at my house. One is a TV that came with the Amazon Fire interface on it. And then the other one, I just prefer the Amazon Fire interface. So I plugged in an Amazon Fire TV stick into the USB and use Amazon that way. Fire TV is your destination for sports. From live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, plus free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball, which was just last weekend, we're still only a week into the MLB season, or the college basketball tournament, big games this weekend, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On, and also most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me. To learn more, visit amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Today's show is also brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The sports calendar is absolutely loaded, and FanDuel's making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet the tourney, big games this weekend again, MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. I mentioned this being a loaded sports calendar. This is in my mind, the two best times of the sports calendar are October and March/April. Okay. I mean, October, you've got the start of basketball, the start of hockey, baseball playoffs, the heat of football season for college and NBA. And then in March into April, you get obviously the basketball tournament, the college basketball tournament. You get the start of baseball. You get the stretch run of NBA, although you sometimes get games like Wolves Raptors, like we got on Wednesday night, where April basketball isn't always great in the NBA. But there's just all the sports are happening at once. Plus, eventually you get the NFL draft here later in the month of April. So there's a lot going on. It's a great time of year for sports. And again, new customers at FanDuel get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. $200. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So in terms of game flow, I kind of already hit this. Like, the Wolves pulled away second part of the second quarter, really put the game away in the third quarter. Ant came alive. I mentioned he broke that 3-point, that 0 for 22 streak. He was 5 of 12 from deep in this game. I thought he was very good. Naz was awesome, especially early. Rudy dominated the paint. He was a game high plus 33 in this game. I can't believe he only had 2 blocks. It felt like there were a couple of plays where it felt like he had 2 blocks on the same play. The Wolves got a bunch of bench guys some run. Chris Finch did a great job. Monte Morris played 25 minutes in this game, which is more than any other bench player, 5th overall, tied for 4th overall in the Wolves. Good to get Monte Morris some run and get him a bit of confidence offensively. He was a plus 30 off the bench, which, again, in a game they win by 48, the 33 and the 30 don't seem like a lot, but nobody else was above a 26. So Monte Morris was 13 and 5. 13 points, 5 assists, 4 boards. He was 5 of 8 shooting and 3 of 5 from outside the arc. Good to see him get some run. Jordan McLaughlin was actually the only guy that played double-digit minutes and didn't score, and one of only 2 Wolves players, including Daisha Nix, who did not score at all in the game. But McLaughlin was good. He just missed a couple of open threes, and that was bound to happen eventually. The dude was shooting over 50% from deep coming into the game. So good to get those guys some additional run. TJ Warren hasn't been in the rotation since the team got, healthy minus Cat, and then Warren was signed for the rest of the season. He played 14 minutes in this game. His three-pointer still looks very flat, like a weirdly flat three-point shot. Not one that I haven't seen a three-point shot look that flat in a long time in the NBA. But every time TJ Warren hoists one up, it looks like it has no chance. But he did score 8 points on 5 shots. He was 3 of 3 on 2-point attempts and got to the line once. He had 4 boards in 14 minutes. So, again, good to see some bench run. My key takeaways in this game, I talked a little bit already about how the Wolves started. It was another slow start offensively for Minnesota. It ultimately didn't matter. The timeout by Finch halfway through the second quarter was key. Things are pretty much great after that. Early in the game, it was transition defense again, which was a problem. And I talked the other day, I think it might have been Tuesday's show. I talked about how last season transition defense was a monster issue for Minnesota, and it hurt them throughout the year. This year, it was actually really, really good for most of the season, but they've struggled to play defense in transition lately. And I don't necessarily think it started with the Cat injury, but it's been really bad since then. I think it had been trending in the wrong direction prior. And it's frustrating because the half-court defense is historically good, which we've talked about in the show. And I've used that word. I saw a couple other people throwing that around on Twitter too. And I mean it when I say it's historically good. If you missed the show a couple weeks ago, I looked at the last 20 seasons, and the Wolves have the second greatest gap between the best and the second best league defense in terms of points per possession. So I said that weird. Only once in the last 20 years has there been a greater gap between the best defensive team in the league and the second best defensive team in the league. And that was like the, let's see, do I have it here still somewhere? It was the 2015-16 Spurs had a 3.1 point per 100 possession differential. The Wolves coming into this game were a shade under 3. It's got to be right around 3 for sure after this game, their defensive rating. So all that to say, it's a historically great defense. How much better could it be if they were just more consistent in terms of their transition defense? Overall, though, I'm nitpicking. Obviously, they won by 48. But that was the thing that kept Toronto in it for a quarter and a half was lack of transition defense for Minnesota and just a clunky offense. The Wolves did a really good job, as we talked about, not turning the ball over, and the Wolves also shot the ball well from the perimeter, which they'd struggled with lately. They were overall 20 of 43, 46.5%. What were they in the Warriors game? I think they were 21 of 40. So in the same neighborhood in terms of how hot they were from deep. Best three-point shooters for the game. Naz was 6 of 10. Ant was 5 of 12. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 4 of 6, which was good to see. And Monte Morris, 3 of 5. Also, Leonard Miller hit a 3 from the corner in garbage time, which was fun. So all those things are my biggest takeaways for this one. Let's talk garbage time first, and then we'll do studs and duds. And then we'll do a peek at the Western Conference standings and kind of reset here with 2 weeks left in the regular season. Crazy, just 2 weeks left. Garbage time was like the last 10-ish minutes. Luka Garza came in with about 9 minutes left on the clock. Luka had 16 points in 9 minutes in this game. He had 2 rebounds. They were both offensive. 7 of 10 shooting the basketball. Misses only 3-point attempt. Got to the line a couple of times. It was 2 of 3 at the line. 16 and 2 plus 1 assist and 1 steal for Luka Garza in 9 minutes. We got to see Josh Minott. He was fairly quiet. Leonard Miller hit that corner 3 I mentioned. Daishen Nix was very quiet. He did miss a corner 3. He also had 3 assists and a steal, though. Daishen Nix did. Wendell Moore Jr. Had a couple of nice plays. Had a nice hit-ahead pass at one point for an assist, I think, to Garza in kind of a broken floor situation. And there was one other nice pass he had. And then his bucket, he was aggressive and kind of ran through a defender on his way to the basket. And I thought it was a strong move. Not that we've seen a lot of actual rotation minutes of Wendell Moore at the NBA level over his, 3 seasons in the league now. But that was a nice play. One of the better, more aggressive physical plays I've seen him make, which is one of the concerns with him as a prospect still is physicality. I mentioned Leonard Miller, his quarter 3. He also had 2 assists in 5 minutes, and one of them was a really nice kind of almost a scoop pass where it was like an underhanded pass, not a true no look, but a nice shovel pass, really, I guess would be the best way to say it, to Luka Garza for a dunk along the baseline late in garbage time. That was a really nice pass. And the Leonard Miller like point center stuff we talked about when he was drafted, that's a thing. Leonard Miller's fantastic. Like what are his I've got him here. He's 6'10" with a 7'2" wingspan. The way I described him when they drafted him, it's been a while since we talked Leonard Miller, was like a much better shooting and better passing version of Jared Vanderbilt. Has less, thickness in terms of strength, his build to him, but he's fluid with his handle. He's active. He's very comfortable playing in multiple dunker spot, active as a cutter, comfortable as a cutter. He certainly has far more touch and upside than Jared Vanderbilt, but in terms of body type and what he could do defensively for like right now, I think there's some similarities there. He's got to be a little stronger, I think, to do well on the glass at the NBA level. But this is a guy who, very different profile than a guy like Kyle Anderson. But that's the type of role he could play next year. If Kyle Anderson leaves in free agency, could Leonard Miller step in? Now, you'd obviously be losing another playmaker, creator. There's a lot of things Slow-Mo does that Leonard Miller does not do. But that type of profile of a player who's probably best cast as a 4, but can play some 5. Leonard Miller's skill set, he could play some 3 in really big lineups, which the Wolves, of course, like to do. I'm excited to see what the Wolves decide to do. There's a lot of questions about the offseason, but like a guy like Leonard Miller, a guy like Josh Minott, are they going to get a crack at some, like this team's capped out, right? Like they're going to need some cheap rotation minutes. Could either one of those guys provide that? I think part of it hinges on how the summer ends, right? Like if the Wolves win the finals, maybe that looks a little different. If they flame out the second round, and like, I don't know. We'll see how that impacts their decision making. Anyway, fun to see Leonard Miller in garbage time. Fun to see Josh Minot play a little bit. Wendell Moore played well. Luka played well. Daisha Nix a bit more nondescript minutes, but garbage time is always fun when it's the plus side of garbage time, the plus side of the ledger for the Wolves. All right, let's talk individual studs and duds. Then let's talk Western Conference standings and where we sit as we head towards the weekend here. All that's coming up here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. And there's no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. All right, individual studs and duds from a 48-point Wolves win. Number one has to be Naz Reid in this game. Naz was fantastic, especially early when this was a close game. 23 points, 8 of 15 shooting, greater than 50% from the field, 6 of 10 on threes, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks, 1 assist, 1 steal for Naz Reid. And this was like the second straight game where an opponent, Houston, did the same thing Tuesday night, where they just like didn't get out on Naz Reid on the perimeter, and Naz just had a field day shooting threes. He only played 26 minutes in this game and scored 23 points on 15 shots. He hit, what was he yesterday? Was he also 6 of 10 on threes yesterday? Oh, no, he's 3 of 5. Okay. Or not yesterday, Tuesday against Toronto. So he was 6 of 10 in this game against Toronto from deep. He was 3 of 5, against Houston the other night. 3 of 9 the game before that. Remember, he had that cold streak. He was 1 of 8 against Detroit and then 0 of 5 against Denver. So he's 1 for 13. And then he hauls off and goes, 12 for 24. So 50% over his last 3 games. Like, that's the league, right? Like, that's how this works. It's law of averages. It's the whole thing. And we're seeing Naz back here on a little bit of a heater. 7 points against Denver on 12 shots, 14 points on 14 shots against Chicago. Now 25 points on 17 shots against Houston, 23 on 15 against Toronto. And Naz looks very comfortable right now for the Wolves. Anthony Edwards also gets a stud. Struggled a little with the shot again early, but he found it. 28 points, 10 of 23 shooting, 5 of 12 from deep, 3 of 5 at the line, 6 assists, 0 turnovers, a goose egg in the turnover category for Ant, which is great to see given some of those problems that have cropped back up here recently for Ant. It feels like it really ebbs and flows, the turnover thing. Remember against Indiana, the first game, sans Cat, he had 44 points and no turnovers. He followed that up with 5 turnovers in Cleveland. He'd hovered around the 2 to 3 turnover mark, basically averaging 2.5 turnovers a game for the next few weeks, which is really good for a guy whose usage is that high and is always playing 36 minutes a game. He had 6 turnovers in the loss to the Bulls on Sunday, a bit of an uneven performance in that game, and it was the middle of his shooting slump, right? He was 0 of 8 against Denver, 0 of 5 from deep against Chicago, 0 of 6 against Houston, and then only 3 turnovers against the Rockets Tuesday, although the shot still wasn't there, and then 28 and 6, 23 shots attempted, 5 of 12 from deep, and no turnovers compared to those 6 assists for Ant in this game. So really good Ant performance as well. I thought he was good defensively. The whole team, I mean, they only gave up 85 points, and obviously Toronto was severely lacking true NBA talent in this game. But I thought the Wolves did lock in defensively fairly well, really throughout the game. I mean, it was just kind of the fast break stuff, late first, early second quarter that was a problem. But otherwise, Minnesota was really good defensively. Third stud for me, you could go Monte Morris. You could go Rudy Gobert. I'll go Rudy with the way he controlled the paint. He did actually have 4 turnovers, which was the most of any Wolves player, but he had 11 and 15, 11 and 15, 11 points, 15 rebounds for Rudy, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal for Gobert, 3 of 6 shooting from the field, and 5 of 8 from the free throw line. This was more just about controlling the paint. Lots of what's being affectionately called on the broadcast as never minds, with where guys get near the paint and just veer out because Rudy's there. Saw a lot of that. Saw a lot of back taps. Saw a lot of offensive rebounding. He had 15 boards in the game. 5 of them were of the offensive variety for Rudy. And he was, as I mentioned earlier, a game-high plus 33 because he just simply dominated the paint. Again, the box score will tell you the Wolves were only a plus 6 points in the paint, only a plus 2 rebounding the basketball. But I venture to guess that a chunk of, garbage time made that thing closer for both rebounds and points in the paint. Rudy really did control it early on. So those are my 3 studs, Rudy, Naz, and Ant, in no particular order. We talked already about Luka Garza's garbage time. We talked about Monte Morris a little more on him. 13 points on 5 of 8 shooting, 3 of 5 outside the arc, 5 assists to 0 turnovers for Monte Morris, and 4 rebounds. The Wolves as a team, by the way, 37 assists to just 9 turnovers, which is a phenomenal ratio. Rudy and Naz dragged that down. Rudy and Naz combined were 4 assists to 6 turnovers. Everybody else was outstanding. Ant, 6 assists, no turnovers. Kyle Anderson, 5 assists, no turnovers. Monte Morris, 5 assists, no turnovers. Slow-mo, by the way, only played 17 minutes. He'd been having these really big, stat-stuffing games lately. Only 17 minutes played, but he still managed to get 5 assists and no turnovers and grab 3 rebounds. So another strong performance from Kyle Anderson. Nothing else really major from the box score. Again, this was just a dominant game. Oh, Jaden was awesome defensively. He guarded his brother a little bit. That was fun. He blocked his brother, was called for a foul. The Wolves challenged. It was overturned. So that was kind of a funny moment. But he had 8 points, 4 rebounds, but also 2 steals, 3 blocks, and 2 assists for Jaden McDaniels. So a nice game for him also. All right, let's talk standings. The Oklahoma City Thunder lost again. Their second consecutive loss. They lost on Wednesday night to the Celtics on the second night of a back-to-back. So back-to-back games, losses to the Sixers and Celtics after that 1-point win with the Shea game winner at the Knicks on, I think that was Sunday. Now they still have to go to Indiana, which is not super easy. Remember, the Wolves beat them in that first game without Cat. And then it lightens up a little. They get the Hornets, Kings, Spurs before closing the year with Bucks and Mavs. So what? They have 6 games left, OKC does, and they're probably going to be favored in, I mean, they're at home against the Bucks and Mavs, so I bet they're favored in, 4 of the 6? I would say probably home for the Bucks is probably the only one they won't be favored in. But it's not like an easy schedule by any stretch for OKC. Denver, they've got 6 games left. They're at the Clippers, home for the Hawks, who have been playing really well lately and are at the moment are in the play-in in the East, at the Jazz, Wolves at home with both teams on a back-to-back, and then at San Antonio, at Memphis. So that's the easiest schedule of anybody, although 4 of the 6 games are on the road for Denver. And then Minnesota, I think, is somewhere in the middle in terms of difficulty. The Wolves have at Phoenix on Friday, at the Lakers Sunday, then home for the Wizards, at the Nuggets for back-to-back, finishing at home with the Hawks and Suns. So 2 Suns games left. So actually, I would say that's the toughest of the schedules. 2 Suns games left. And the Hawks are hot. The Lakers are the Lakers. The Nuggets are great. And, the Wizards are beatable. So the Wolves will be favored in all those games except for at Denver. Yeah, probably should just be at Denver. So anyway, less than 2 weeks left, 6 games apiece for each of these 3 teams. And as we sit right now, the Timberwolves are atop the Western Conference. They have an identical record as the Denver Nuggets, but they have a 2-1 series advantage. And then also the second tiebreaker is division, where the Wolves have a massive 3.5 game lead in terms of division record. The Wolves are 12-3 in the Northwest Division this year. So right now, the Wolves are in first in the West, a full game ahead of OKC, tied with Denver, with each team with 6 games to play. And right now, the Wolves, of course, would play whoever ends up with the 8 seed. So, some version of the Pelicans, Kings, Lakers, Warriors, which I really don't like the Pelicans matchup. They're tied with the Suns right now for the 6th seed. Neither the Suns or Pelicans are teams I'm excited about the Wolves playing in the first round. I'd much rather have the Lakers or Warriors. And I'd rather have the Kings than the Pelicans and Suns too. So It's going to be interesting to see how this thing shakes out. So we'll obviously keep an eye on that. And as we get a little closer, we'll talk out some different scenarios, and I'll give my reasoning for preferred matchups in the playoffs for the Wolves. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves can be found anywhere for free. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Remember, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.